Imagine American television without MASH. It's tough, right? That's because the show wasn't just popular, it completely reshaped what a sitcom could be. Premiering in 1972 during the final years of the Vietnam War, MASH was set in the Korean War and uniquely blended humor with heartbreak. Through its quirky characters, the series explored both the absurdity of war and the resilience of the human spirit, quickly becoming a fan favorite. However, behind the scenes, the show was constantly evolving. As it leaned further into social commentary and more complex character arcs, tension sometimes rose. Several beloved stars eventually made the difficult decision to leave the series. Were their exits driven by personal reasons, professional ambitions, or creative conflicts? The answers may surprise you. Let's take a closer look at what really happened. History of MASH, a war story told with heart. There's a lot to unpack with this story, but before diving in, it's important to rewind the clock and explore how this legendary series came to life. Like many other impeccable television shows, the story of MASH didn't begin on TV, but on the pages of a book. Back in 1968, Dr. Richard Hooker, the pen name of Korean War surgeon H. Richard Hornberger, published MASH, a novel about 3 army doctors. The novel was a fictionalized account of his time serving as a mobile army surgical hospital doctor during the Korean War. Thanks to its blend of gallows humor, human warmth, and bitter reality, the book quickly became a bestseller and caught Hollywood's attention. 2 years after its publication, director Robert Altman adapted the novel into the film MASH, a satirical black comedy that was both irreverent and sobering. The movie starred Donald Sutherland as Hawkeye Pierce and Elliot Gould as Trapper John, striking a powerful chord with audiences, especially as the Vietnam War loomed large in American consciousness. The film became both a critical and commercial success, winning the Palme d'Or at Cannes and an Academy Award for Best Screenplay. But the true cultural explosion came 2 years later when CBS adapted the concept into a weekly television series. Developed by Larry Gelbart and Gene Reynolds, the TV version of MASH debuted on September 17, 1972. While it retained the wartime setting and offbeat humor, it introduced a more serialized, character-driven format that allowed for deeper emotional storytelling. Alan Alda stepped into the role of Hawkeye Pierce and quickly became the heart of the series. Although the first season struggled with ratings and nearly faced cancellation, CBS took a chance by moving the show to Saturday nights. That decision paid off, ratings soared, and so did the show's cultural impact. To many viewers, MASH broke the rules of television. It was groundbreaking in Hollywood, experimenting with format, incorporating real war footage, and becoming one of the first American comedies to regularly replace a laugh track with the sound of helicopters. Alan Alda later expanded his role behind the camera, becoming a director, writer, and major creative force who pushed for greater realism and emotional complexity. As MASH matured, so did its characters, but not everyone agreed with the new direction. Some actors felt their roles were shrinking or becoming caricatures, while others struggled with personal challenges or felt compelled to explore different creative paths. Over its 11-season run, the series experienced numerous cast changes, yet it always remained anchored to a single mission: revealing the true cost of war through compassion, wit, and unbreakable human bonds. With that in mind, let's jump into the first major exit from the series, an actor whose departure was so unexpected that the writers chose to kill off his character in a moment that shocked the nation. McLean Stevenson. If you ask longtime MASH fans which moment hit them the hardest, many will point to the final scene of Season 3's finale, Abyssinia, Henry. It came down to just one quiet line delivered by radar, yet it changed everything. Lieutenant Colonel Henry Blake's plane was shot down over the Sea of Japan. There were no survivors. That moment was groundbreaking, not only because it stunned audiences, but because it marked the first major departure of a core MASH cast member, McLean Stevenson. So how did it come to this? From the very beginning, McLean Stevenson was a vital part of the show. As the affable and often confused commanding officer of the 4077th, Colonel Henry Blake served as the perfect foil to the madness of war. While Hawkeye and Trapper brought rebellion and sharp wit, Henry Blake embodied humanity, sometimes frazzled, sometimes clueless, but always well-meaning. In the early seasons, McLean's performance earned widespread praise, including a Golden Globe. He was funny, relatable, and deeply loved by fans. But behind the scenes, things weren't quite as harmonious. According to interviews and memoirs from the cast and writers, McLean grew increasingly frustrated with his role. While the show started as a loose ensemble comedy, it quickly began centering around Alan Alda's Hawkeye Pierce. And as Alda became more involved in the writing and direction of the show, his character took on greater emotional and narrative weight. McLean, meanwhile, felt sidelined. So sidelined that he even once told People magazine in 1975, "I want to be number one. I want to be the guy carrying the show." But as egotistical as this probably sounds, it wasn't actually about McLean's ego. You see, McLean had these big dreams of becoming a star, he had huge ambitions. But if there's one thing you should know about Hollywood, it's that it's usually very easy for an actor to fall into a stereotypical role. And for McLean, he was falling into this pit that he wanted nothing to do with. He saw how powerful television could be, and he believed he had the charisma and talent to anchor a show of his own. He wanted to pursue opportunities where he wouldn't always be the second or third banana. He wanted to be the first. So, at the end of season 3, McLean approached the producers and told them he would not be returning. Now here's where things took a turn. Traditionally, when actors left sitcoms, their characters were written off gently, transferred, reassigned, and maybe even sent off to get married. But MASH wasn't a traditional sitcom. Its creators, Larry and Gene, saw an opportunity to do something bold. They wanted to remind viewers that MASH was, at its heart, a war story. That in war, not everyone makes it home. And this was the perfect opportunity. What succeeded this was the legendary Abyssinia, Henry episode. In the episode, Henry Blake receives his discharge orders and prepares to head home. There's celebration, tears, hugs, a joyful farewell. For 25 minutes, it feels like a happy ending. But then comes the final scene like a raging storm. Radar walks into the operating room, hat in hand, face grave. The doctors are mid-surgery when he breaks the news that Lieutenant Colonel Henry Blake's plane was shot down over the Sea of Japan. There were no survivors. What followed was an intense silence that could be heard around America. No dramatic music, no laugh track or helicopter noises. Just stunned faces and the beep of surgical equipment. That scene changed TV history. It was one of the first times a beloved sitcom character was killed off, permanently and without warning. The raw reactions from the cast was partly real as only a few knew the ending beforehand. Alda later revealed that Gary Burghoff, who plays Radar, was the only actor told in advance so he could prepare. The rest of the cast was reacting genuinely in that final take. As soon as it aired, the episode generated an immediate and intense response. CBS received thousands of letters, many praising the show's honesty, others angry that such a beloved character was taken away so suddenly. Some even accused the producers of going too far. But Larry defended the decision, saying, "We wanted to say that not everybody gets to go home." And that they did. But, what happened to McLean after his departure? Let's just say things weren't as rosy as he probably imagined. Granted, things were pretty great at first. He signed a lucrative deal with NBC, eager to strike out on his own. He then moved on to star in The McLean-Stevenson Show, a family sitcom built around his affable charm. He appeared to be charting out his own terms and making a name for himself in the industry, but it was short-lived. His show was cancelled after just one season and a second attempt, with the show Hello, Larry, fared even worse. Despite high hopes and heavy promotion, the show was critically panned and became a running joke in later years. In retrospect, McLean would come to regret leaving MASH. In a 1983 interview with the Los Angeles Times, he admitted, "I took myself out of the game." It wasn't just that his new shows flopped, it was more so the realization that MASH was a once-in-a-lifetime experience. The cast, the writing, the impact, it was lightning in a bottle. Some of his co-stars, like Alda and Loretta Swit, expressed sadness about his departure, but they also understood his desire to branch out. Others quietly wondered if he had been too quick to walk away from something special. Despite his regrets, McLean continued working in television and made occasional guest appearances on other shows. But he never found the same level of success, or emotional connection with audiences, as he did playing Henry Blake. When he passed away in '96 at the age of 68, tributes poured in from fans and colleagues, with Alda remembering him as a wonderful actor and a good man, and Gary calling him a light-hearted spirit who brought joy to everyone around him. Say what you want about McLean, but in a way, his departure gave the show its soul. And that's the irony. While he may have left to find his big break, the role he walked away from became the most enduring of his career. But if you thought McLean's departure was nerve-wracking, Wayne Rogers' exit from MASH was something else entirely: quiet, complicated. The story was dramatic, especially behind the scenes. While McLean received a farewell episode, a tearful goodbye, and a moment that became television history, Wayne Rogers' exit was very different. Wayne Rogers simply vanished. He appeared in one episode, and then suddenly, he was gone. There was no goodbye, no explanation, and certainly no closure. The reason, as it turns out, shows that things are not always as rosy on set as they appear on camera. To understand what really happened, we need to return to the beginning. Wayne Rogers played trapper John McIntyre, one half of the original comedic duo that defined MAS*H's early seasons. Alongside Alan Alda's Hawkeye Pierce, he brought life to the 4077th. Their chemistry was magnetic, and audiences loved it, especially their fast-paced banter, mischief, and unshakable friendship. Watching them felt like a wartime version of The Odd Couple, just with more scalpel jokes. Behind the laughter, however, tension was quietly building. Wayne had joined MAS*H believing it would be a true ensemble show, with equal screen time for the core cast. As the series evolved, much of the spotlight began shifting toward Alda's character. Hawkeye was no longer just a co-lead, he became the moral center and emotional anchor of the show. When Alda, a gifted writer and director, started contributing heavily to the show's creative direction, the balance changed even further. At first, Wayne did not resent Alda's success. Reports suggest the two were friendly off-set, but over time, Wayne began to feel sidelined. Hawkeye's character continued to mature, while others seemed stuck in their original cocoons. Trapper John gradually went from being a leading man to a supporting character. Wayne later explained in interviews that it was not about ego but about storytelling integrity. He once said, "Trapper didn't have much to do. He was one of two buddies, and then he became the guy who nodded at everything Alan said." Unlike McLean, who made a public exit and received a send-off, Wayne chose a quieter route. Without fuss or drama, he decided not to renew his contract after season 3. In fact, the producers did not even realize he was officially gone until shortly before filming for season 4 began. What made the situation even more unusual was that Wayne's contract had never been formally signed. He had been working under a handshake agreement the entire time. When producers threatened legal action for breach of contract, they had no legal standing because no contract existed. Wayne had simply walked away from a show he no longer believed allowed his character to grow. His sudden departure left the writers scrambling. As a result, the opening of season 4 had to be reworked, explaining in the first episode that Trapper John had been discharged while Hawkeye was on leave. The audience reaction was harsh. First Henry, and now Trapper, viewers questioned whether it was even real. To make matters worse, there was no farewell scene, no hospital party, and no heartfelt goodbye. To manage the fallout, the producers introduced Mike Farrell as B.J. Honeycutt. The new character was written to be more grounded, emotionally complex, and less rebellious than Trapper. This shift immediately changed the show's dynamic. The buddy comedy edge faded, replaced by a softer, more introspective tone. Ironically, MAS*H grew deeper and arguably better after Trapper's departure. While many fans still prefer the early seasons, others feel the later ones reached greater emotional depth. Wayne Rogers, meanwhile, did not fade from public life. After MAS*H, he appeared in television shows and films before taking an entirely different path as a successful financial investor and commentator. Wayne was exceptionally intelligent. He studied history at Princeton and later built a career on Wall Street. By the 1990s, he was a regular panelist on Fox News' Cashin' In, discussing economics and policy. He made millions not from acting, but through savvy investing. Despite this new direction, Wayne never completely left Hollywood. He appeared in several TV movies, took on a few recurring roles, and even joked about his time on MAS*H in later interviews. Despite the abrupt nature of his departure, there was no lasting bad blood between him and the cast. Alan Alda once said, "Wayne is one of the smartest people I've ever worked with. I missed him a lot when he left." That friendship endured. When Wayne passed away in 2015 at the age of 82, Alda tweeted, "He was smart, funny, curious, and dedicated. We made a pact to give each other a hard time for the rest of our lives, and I'm sorry we won't have the chance." Although Wayne left MASH at the height of its early popularity, without fanfare or applause, he's still remembered with affection by fans who love Trapper's playful grin and easygoing charm. We've been all about how all of these actors left to pursue other paths. But how about those who left because the series was so emotionally challenging? Gary Burghoff. It's ironic, considering he was the heart of the team, but Gary Burghoff didn't leave MASH with fanfare or celebration. He left quietly, painfully, and for reasons far deeper than most people ever realized. To fans, Gary was Radar O'Reilly, the wide-eyed company clerk with uncanny intuition, a teddy bear under one arm and the war under the other. Radar could hear helicopters before anyone else. He had a sweet, almost childlike innocence that softened the harshness of the battlefield. And while Hawkeye and Trapper broke rules, and Henry Blake fumbled through leadership, Radar was the glue, soul, and some might even say the emotional heartbeat of the 4077th. But behind that soft voice and nervous smile was an actor slowly unraveling under the weight of it all. Gary was the only actor to reprise his role from the original 1970 MASH film. And in doing so, he brought a vulnerability to Radar that didn't exist in the film. The movie version of Radar was more mischievous, even a little sleazy. But on TV, Gary shaped Radar into something unforgettable, a symbol of lost innocence during wartime. In fact, his performance was so iconic that he was often considered irreplaceable. And yet, by season 7, cracks began to show. Gary was struggling, personally and professionally. The grueling production schedule of MASH, combined with his own perfectionism, began to wear him down. He had long battles with anxiety and depression, something that rarely made headlines at the time but deeply affected his ability to cope with the demands of filming. Then there was the pain of being away from his family. By the late 70s, Gary was married and had a young daughter. But the long hours on set meant he was constantly away from home, and he even later admitted that missing his daughter's early years felt like a mistake I never stopped regretting. In a 2018 interview, co-star Mike Farrell recalled, Gary had emotional problems. He always felt that he wasn't getting the attention or appreciation he deserved. But I think he underestimated how much we all respected him. There were also contractual disputes stemming from the fact that Gary wanted better pay, more flexibility, and less screen time so he could manage his personal life. The producers, aware of how central Radar was to the show, tried to accommodate him as best they could. At one point, Gary was even granted more time off and fewer appearances per season. But it wasn't enough for him. Emotionally, he was done. And so, in season 8, he made the difficult decision to leave MASH for good. But this time, unlike Wayne, the show didn't let him slip away quietly. Radar got a 2-part farewell episode titled Goodbye, Radar, one of the most heart-wrenching storylines in the series. In it, Radar returns from leave to discover the 4077th falling apart in his absence. At first, he tries to fix everything, just like always, but in the end, he realizes it's time to move on. His mother needs him back home, his community farm is in trouble. And, perhaps, Radar has finally grown up. The final scene of the episode is nearly silent, just Radar, walking away, silhouetted against the Korean sky, his teddy bear left behind on Hawkeye's bunk. That moment was as emotional as it was touching. And it said everything the show couldn't put words to. And the audience felt that loss because watching him leave felt like saying goodbye to our own innocence. After MASH, Gary took a long break from acting. He made a few appearances, including a short-lived spin-off called Walter, where Radar becomes a rookie cop. But it didn't quite take off. Eventually, he chose to step away from Hollywood altogether, instead devoting himself to painting, wildlife conservation, and inventing. Yes, you heard right, inventing. He held several patents, including one for a fishing tackle system. His love for nature soon became a refuge and a way to heal from the pressures of fame and the emotional toll MASH had taken on him. Gary would later explain that he left for 2 reasons, my family and burnout. I wanted to pick up the pieces of my life. And who could blame him? Today, Gary lives a quiet life. He doesn't do many interviews. He doesn't chase the spotlight. But every now and then, fans will spot him at a convention or read a rare quote, and they remember the kid with the soft heart and the big ears who could hear choppers before anyone else. Now, let's move on to the man who played one of TV's most hilarious villains. Larry Linville. It's hard to imagine early MASH without Frank Burns, the rigid, petty, and hopelessly self-important character. Played to Larry Linville perfection by Larry Linville, Major Burns was the character audiences loved to hate. His sycophantic obsession with rules, his secret affair with Major Houlihan, and his deep inferiority complex made him the perfect comic foil to Hawkeye and Trapper. But as the show matured, Frank's one-note villainy began to stand out, and not in a good way. While other characters deepened, Frank remained stuck in a loop. His insecurities never evolved, and his prejudices were never challenged. And Larry, an actor with far more range than he was allowed to show, started to feel the strain. By the end of season 5, Larry made a bold decision: he wouldn't renew his contract. In his words, he had taken the character as far as he could. He wasn't fired and definitely wasn't pushed. He simply walked away, recognizing that MASH was growing beyond Frank's limited function. And the ripple effect was enormous. With Frank gone, the show was free to explore more layered moral conflicts. There was no longer a need for a cartoon villain. The comedy could come from irony and humanity rather than slapstick and cruelty. In many ways, we like to think that Larry's exit marked a creative crossroads for MASH, one that would elevate it from good to legendary. But that doesn't mean fans didn't feel the loss. For 5 seasons, Frank was the punchline and the pressure. His departure forced the series to rethink its rhythm. And while his exit wasn't mourned in the show's storyline, he was written out off-screen as having received a cushy promotion, it was deeply felt in the show's DNA. Larry went on to do guest roles in TV and film but never again found a part as visible or as unforgettable as Major Frank Burns. Not only was Larry's character written out of the show, another character, who would also later leave the show, was written in to kind of take his place. David Ogden Stiers. If Frank Burns was the cartoon villain, Charles Emerson Winchester III was the slow burn. Winston III. Brought in to replace Frank in Season 6, Winchester couldn't have been more different. Cultured, brilliant, arrogant, and deeply private, he was more than just an antagonist, he was a challenge. To Hawkeye. To BJ. To the very tone of the show itself. And David Ogden Stiers played him with exquisite restraint. At first, Winchester came off as pompous and insufferable. But over time, cracks began to show. He wasn't heartless, just guarded. And he definitely wasn't cruel, maybe just a little proud. Beneath the layers of opera and wine talk was a man reckoning with the brutal reality of war, one patient at a time. Unlike Larry or the others, David didn't exit mid-series. He stayed until the final episode, leaving not in protest, but in poetic closure. His final scene, teaching Chinese POWs to play Mozart, is one of the most hauntingly beautiful moments in television history. And that was the power of Winchester. He wasn't there to be liked. He was there to remind us that war breaks everyone, even those who think they're too refined to be touched by it. When given the chance to join the spin-off after MASH, David passed on it, explaining that his character's arc was complete. In his words, Winchester had said what he needed to say. Following his successful time on the show, he went on to voice Disney characters, and in 2009, he came out with his sexuality during an interview with the website Gossip Boy, saying, "I am gay. Very proud to be so." According to him, he hadn't come out earlier in his career because he feared it might hurt his chances in the industry, particularly when he was doing voice work for Disney and still appearing in television and film. At the time, there was real concern that coming out could cost actors roles or lead to typecasting. Despite being private about his personal life for most of his career, he was deeply respected in the industry, both for his dignity and his extraordinary range. He passed away in 2018, at age 75 from bladder cancer. Still, his legacy remains not only in his performances but also in the quiet courage it took to live his truth on his own terms. But we can't wrap this video up without some honorary mentions. Although the women in this show typically played background and supporting characters, their roles were pivotal to the development of the show's tone. And one such woman was Major Margaret "Hot Lips" Houlihan. The women of MASH. In a war zone filled with men cracking jokes to keep the darkness at bay, the women of MASH had a tougher job, being seen. Major Margaret. And no woman faced a steeper climb, or a more remarkable transformation, than Major Margaret "Hot Lips" Houlihan, played by Loretta Swit. When MASH began, Margaret was written as the punchline. Her nickname said it all, Hot Lips, a reference to a gag in the original film. She was strict, by the book, and often the object of ridicule. But Loretta refused to let Margaret stay in that box. With every season, she infused the character with intelligence, strength, and vulnerability. By the end of the series, Margaret wasn't just respected, she was fully realized, complex, and quietly revolutionary. Loretta once said in an interview, "I wanted her to be a woman of substance." And she was. Margaret became a decorated officer, a skilled head nurse, and one of the few characters who openly questioned the war's cruelty while still doing her job with unshakable precision. Interestingly, while many male actors left MASH, Loretta stayed for all 11 seasons. She was one of only 4 actors to appear in both the pilot and the finale. While recurring female characters like Lieutenant Ginger Bayless or Nurse Cutler came and went, Margaret stayed, and evolved. In a show where war stripped everyone down to their barest selves, Margaret stood tall. And thanks to Loretta's persistence, the only woman in the opening credits made sure the boys didn't carry the show alone. What actors did we miss? Tell us in the comments below. Thanks for watching. To enjoy more exciting videos, click play on the video on your screen. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell so you get notified when a new video drops.